Former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld has had a distinguished career both in public service and in the private sector. He opens up about both in his new book called Rumsfeld's Rules, Leadership Lessons in Business, Politics, War, and Life. Mr. Secretary, it was good to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I've got a lot to talk to you about on the book, but there's a couple of topics making news right now I want your take on. Benghazi and what the administration knew and said in the hours and days after the attack on our consulate there. You said in October, quote, "The responsibility for the way the White House has tried to cover this up and manage it falls on the president." Yesterday, the president said there is no there, that it's a sideshow, and that it defies logic to say there was a cover-up. Do you still think there was?
I do. I think that as it's unfolded, it's very clear that the people knew from the outset that it was not the YouTube, that it was not a demonstration. And people on the ground and people in Washington have now testified to that.
Do you think that the administration has answered enough questions on it? Do you think it's possible that some Republicans are trying to use this to discredit Hillary Clinton in case she decides to run for president in 2016?
No, I think that's the sideshow. Is the Hillary Clinton piece of it. No, the first problem was if you're going to put people at risk, you have to try to protect them. And the British took their people out because they knew they were at risk, and the Americans were left in, and they weren't provided the kind of security that they needed, obviously, because they're dead.
Let's turn to your book. Lots of rules and maxims in here. Some make perfect common sense. Set your goals. Learn from those who have been there. Trust your instincts. This one caught my eye, though, Mr. Secretary. It is easier to get into something than to get out of it.
It's true.
Now, do you think a lot of people are going to read that and immediately say Iraq and Afghanistan?
Well, sure. Of course. It is. And there's another word or phrase that comes in, and that's mission creep. In other words, the reason we went into Afghanistan was because of the attacks on September 11th and the fact that the Taliban was the host to Al-Qaeda. And that problem was taken care of relatively quickly, in a matter of weeks, with a relatively few number of troops. The numbers were 25, maybe 30,000 Americans is all. President Obama's now had 100,000 in that country. And obviously it's a different mission.
Right. But do you the question a lot of our people are going to ask is, did the Bush administration and did Donald Rumsfeld even have that saying up on a wall somewhere, and did they look at that motto before they committed to wars in Afghanistan and Iraq?
The answer is yes. I actually wrote a memo, which is on my website, rumsfeld.com, that's been called the Parade of Horribles. I sat down and wrote all the things that could go wrong that I could think of prior to the president's decision to go into Iraq. One of which was there may not be stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction.
You write about your time as defense secretary, quote, your words here, "There was no shortage of decisions I made that rattled a few cages and made some folks unhappy. Might I have approached some of those decisions differently, knowing what I know now? Of course." And you talk about wishing you hadn't misspoken in a couple of situations and maybe being more forceful with President Bush at the time about accepting your resignation after Abu Ghraib. But that's a little bit like falling on your sword. Is there a specific military or policy decision that you wish you could have changed?
Sure. I mean, for example, a personnel decision is really if it's a mistake, it's the mistake of the person doing the hiring as opposed to the person coming aboard. And I made a mistake by taking a former general and making him Secretary of the Army. If you know you need to change the culture, if you know you need to move that institution, as the president said, from into the 21st century and into the information age, putting a person who came up through that system in charge as the civilian leadership was a mistake, and I had to correct the mistake. Personnel mistakes don't get better with time.
But a lot of critics take a longer look at them as time passes on.
Of course, another rule in there is that the road not traveled is always smoother.
Good point. Or some people say, take the high road, it's less crowded.
Yeah.
Donald Rumsfeld, it's good to see you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming back. The book, again, is called Rumsfeld's Rules.